What will we learn from our guest today? I'm Martha Schumacher, and I'm glad you asked. Thanks for joining me for our 6th episode. It's hard to believe that this show was just an idea not long ago, and now we're half of a year into Glad You Asked. We've had some great conversations. I've learned a lot from our guests, and I hope you have as well. I've talked often about the role of comfort in active listening in previous episodes. How creating a comfortable environment is key to setting the stage for a conversation. In our episode with Willeke, I explained how presenting ourselves in a calm, encouraging manner can help both parties feel calm and open. In Amiki Carroll's episode, I shared how it's sometimes helpful to push folks out of their comfort zones in order to engage in meaningful conversation with a person or a group of people, as Amiki Carroll and I did at the International Fundraising Congress. Today, I'd like to share some active listening techniques to use when unplanned discomfort arises in a conversation. Conflict resolution doesn't come naturally to anyone. We all have to learn how to deal with the big emotions around tension, such as anger, anxiety, and fear. We start by learning to deal with conflict on the playground as children, by watching our families work through conflict, and by cooperating with different social groups throughout our lives. There are also some key techniques that we can practice to stay calm and move the conversation forward by engaging in active listening to be more direct and purposeful. So let's say you're sitting down with a coworker to discuss a change you'd like to see in the workplace. It's possible that they'll agree and go along with your suggestion, but it's also possible that they'll feel defensive and resist change, as we're all apt to do sometimes. We've already discussed the basics: reflecting emotions such as concern with our facial expressions, validating the speaker's perspective with mm-hms and yes, avoiding interrupting. But when things escalate, we may need more tools. The key is to allow folks to feel validated while staying on track. Always have a goal going into these conversations and stay focused on that goal. You can maintain structure by summarizing the discussion periodically. It's important to give them space to describe their emotions, then bring them back into the conversation by reiterating the key points that you've covered, and then moving forward. Remember, avoiding blame, as we discussed in Willeke's episode, is also crucial. You can do this by always using I statements. So instead of saying, "You're not making sense," try instead, "I'm having trouble understanding this part." If your colleague is persistently upset, try your best to identify the core issue. Listen past the anger to find the underlying need or fear. Focus on that core issue rather than the emotional language. Our goal is empathy, and becoming defensive detracts from empathy. Keep your posture calm. There's that word again. We're using the word calm a lot today, and it's a good reminder. Maintain eye contact and de-escalate through the active listening techniques we've discussed, which helps the speaker feel safe and heard. Again, it's all about building trust. Another thought along these lines, don't forget Q-tip, which is quit taking it personally. That's a lesson I learned early in leadership, and it has been an invaluable tool for me. Most often, something is going on in that person's life, and when they get upset, it's usually not about anything you've done. It's often about something that they are going through. To take it one step further, sometimes I've found that ultimately they're actually upset, maybe at themselves, believe it or not. And yes, of course there are times when it is about you. But when I do dig in with folks, I've found that 9 times out of 10, it's not that. So again, remember Q-tip, quit taking it personally. I'm bringing all of this up because our interview today focuses on disruption, and specifically disruption with purpose. Anytime you're shaking things up, it's likely you'll be met with resistance, and moving through that tension can be difficult, but we can prepare for it. After all, if we're not pushing for change, are we really making progress? Which brings us to today's questions. The first one comes from our guest, Willeke van Rijn. She proposes that instead of focusing on our criticisms, we should focus on solutions when she asks, what is the world we want to see? This query really cuts through the complaints and heads straight to answers. Willike's follow-up questions, by the way, to this one are great as well. Next, I ask, what are your personal leadership and management styles, and why? We're coming back to one of the most important areas of cooperation, leadership styles. Willike's response around ownership is really compelling. And our listener question today is from world-renowned social impact change agent Bernard Ross of MC Consulting, Decision Science, and teacher extraordinaire. He asks, what are 2 to 3 ways the social impact sector can help to build a more equitable society? Again, we're focusing on solutions here. Sharing strategies with one another is the best way to build collaborative efforts toward a brighter future. So with that, let's dive into our conversation about social change, disruption, shaping ethical policies, our collective voice, and so much more. I'm glad you asked. Welcome to Glad You Asked, a show about how active listening can help you build stronger connections with folks in your life, personally and professionally. I'm Martha Schumacher, and I've spent my career asking leaders, funders, donors, and community members thoughtful questions to help find the real reasons behind why they do what they do. And when you pursue these deeper connections, you ultimately arrive at the heart of what really matters, establishing trust. On each episode of Glad You Asked, we'll explore 3 questions, one from our guest, one from a listener, and one from me. During a conversation with mission-driven leaders, we'll test how each question, each compelling prompt, makes active listening possible and deepens our relationships. Afterwards, we'll take a look at how effective our questions were in guiding a meaningful conversation and leave you with a call to action so you can use these questions in your own work and life. Now, let's meet our guest. All right, folks. Well, I am very, very excited to let you know that Willeke van Rijn is the CEO of the Resource Alliance, a global organization supporting and inspiring what they call resource mobilizers. And by the way, I think I may refer to fundraisers forevermore that way, Willeke. I love that. Resource Alliance champions social change, and they've built a powerful community of resource mobilizers across more than 120 countries. All right, with that, Willeke, welcome to Glad You Asked.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and really looking forward to our conversation.
And how are you doing today?
I'm really well. I'm dialing in from London and excited.
Well, we are so lucky to have you. And I feel like because there's just so much I know we want to cover with these 3 questions today, I think we should just dive right in. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So the first question comes from Willeke, and as we do on each episode, we'll talk a bit about her response to that question, how she would answer the question, and then kind of fan it out a bit to think about asking that question of others and how to engage them from an active listening standpoint. So Willeke, I'm going to throw it your way.
Well, maybe to set it a little bit in a framing.
Yes.
We had this conversation very recently with the board of Resource Alliance. We are working on a new strategy. And where I think, we all know operating in the social impact sector, it has been a very turbulent time. We know very much what we do not want to see, and we are all talking about change and about transformation. And the question that I was asking the board members is actually the question that I want to throw in, is could we actually describe the world that we want to see? So instead of what is wrong at the moment and what do we not want to see and we have to change and transform, can we really describe about the bigger question around what does success look like if you're talking about a strategy? But what is the world that we want to see today, next year, the year after that.
Yeah, and I'd be curious. We would love to hear how you would answer that.
Mm-hmm.
And also to your point about board members, because I do think this is such a terrific question for board members because it focuses them in right into why they're serving, why they want to be
Yeah.
on the board if they're coming on, or why they want to remain on the board if they've been on for a while. So I think it's a terrific board member question. But let's hear first from you, Willeke, about how you answer that question.
Well, I think my answer is very much also shaped and formed by the discussion that followed after that. You have to understand what is really wrong at the moment, where is the big problem, but also how do we turn that around? And I think the answer around that was very much around creating a balance again between civil society, state, and market. And in this case, markets being the big economy. And I think we all do realize that the market and some economic influencers or economic forces or powers are not only dominating government at the moment, but also purposely shrinking civic space and therefore civil society. And by creating that rebalancing act, it doesn't always mean that everything goes peaceful. Sometimes it's okay to have a tension between them, but really to see, how can we really create that world that we want to achieve, where human rights are in place, where we care for each other, where we respect nature, where we have an eye and an ear and a listening for marginalized people and different voices, where diversity is appreciated and welcomed, instead of said it's something negative. And that, I think, will always create, in a way, a tension. What gets more attention, what gets another tension, or where do we should be shifting? But at the moment, I would argue it's not even out of balance. It is completely being destroyed. So is government still representing people's voices, or is it mainly representing now the voices of companies, if not a few billionaires? And what we have seen happening with, decline in kind of funding sources. And of course, we're talking here about ODA and decline in USAID, for example. Is that simply a decline in funding, or is it an active act of destroying civil society? And I think we all know what the answer is there.
It sounds to me like part of what happens from an active listening standpoint around your board table perhaps is people are on the same page ultimately, I think, right, at Resource Alliance about they want to promote social good, they want to, put humanity first, and of course want to lift up and support marginalized communities. What I can hear, though, that there might be some tension with, which I happen to welcome, but I know not everyone is comfortable with this idea of how do we do that, right?
I think often tension is seen as something negative, while I actually think it is often based on people start coming in from different angles, and that might not always align at the same endpoint, but therefore you really start kind of discussing about where do we really want to be? It starts triggering kind of your thoughts and coming to the right conclusions. And of course, in this specific conversation, yes, there were very disruptive voices, and we were almost challenged in the workshop around how disruptive do we want to be versus are we not going to be disruptive and actually operate and continue to operate in a system where we also have to realize that part of that system is really wrong. So are we stimulating the system and making it grow versus are we disrupting it? And where is the middle ground? And again, there, one of the big questions was, but if we are disrupting it, then what are we creating? And if we do not have the answer to the question of what are we creating, disrupting is quite easy, but creating the new is not always easy. As Resource Alliance, we invite different thought leaders, different visionaries to trigger our thinking, I think, for everyone in the sector to say, what are the new answers here? And can we create them together? I think 2026 is much more a year where we should think civil society, social impact sector can be the leading force here. And are we playing that role? And are we creating answers to questions that are raised at the moment? Are we creating new narratives?
So much in what you just said, so much richness and robust thinking. I heard a few things. One thing about disruption, one of the things when I served on the AFP Global Board was I found myself constantly asking others, but also asking myself, are we disrupting to disrupt?
Yeah.
Or are we disrupting for a reason, And so I think there's that, right? Another thing that, I'm hearing is that I love your optimism around 2026. I just want to say that. This idea that 2026 is the year of moving beyond the shock and awe period. I know that was a really big issue in 2025. And I like your both optimistic and proactive viewpoint on making 2026 much more about this is a moment where we actually have an opportunity to shape social good, to shape civil society, and to, again, get out ahead of this versus just being reactive and potentially unable to feel like we can make a difference. What do you think?
Of course, you can say I'm optimistic, but of course, I base my optimism also on facts in a way that we really see from our global community. So what can we learn from others? If we look at India, for the past 10 years, civil society has been shrinking, meaning been shrinking because international funding were not allowed coming in anymore. And they completely changed their approach towards localized fundraising and not being dependent on a couple of few international donors anymore. And suddenly they're in a leading role and they really can share with others what that means. We see new funding coming up, and a lot of new funding sources on the Asian continent. Young people that create family trust, that really want to give back in society, sometimes in different forms that we are used to, like impact investment or new financing models. But there is a lot of shifting happening. And I think if we're really looking at US, UK, Europe, where we could easily operate within our own communities, that is suddenly changing. Now we have to open up our kind of vision to look what is happening in other parts of the world. We have beautiful examples from grassroots organizations on the African continent that said we are done with the dependency. We do not want to be dependent on a US founder that is actually not sure if after 3 years they continue to fund because our purpose is not fulfilled after 3 years' time. So can we find social enterprising models where we build on assets that we have that create sustainable financing models for us that continues also after 3 years, and therefore we do not have to go through those cycles every time. And then last but not least, I really believe in the big collective. If we are looking at, I think, humanity in general, but if we definitely look at social impact sector, if we start really collaborating closer together, because there we also need to have a critical look at ourselves, really working towards purpose and maybe less towards our organizational logo, we can really achieve a lot. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I hear you, I understand, and I really agree. And I think before we move into question 2, I just want to bring us back to this ultimate question you asked of what does the ideal world, what does it look like? And that question you ask your board members. And I just wonder, is there anything that your board has done kind of with that concept and answering that question that you want to share in terms of when you think about Resource Alliance and where you are at this moment in time?
Yeah, if you're talking about Resource Alliance, of course, it's all around resourcing. And resourcing is more than fundraising alone. It's around raising your voice, giving your time, sharing your intellect.
Yes.
Can we create a civil society and work towards that where organizations feel autonomous? They have autonomy, they have agency. And civil society where the power dynamics have been changed, not at the funders level, but really at the community level, where we build that's what has to be done and our purposes around the voices and the inputs from the community. But also where we have kind of ethical financial flows, because where is sometimes money coming from?
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, I think that when we're talking about, the people power, that collaborative and collective instinct there, are we really willing to work with each other instead of, for example, to compete with each other, a word that I personally do not like in the sector, because I really believe we need everyone. If we want to see the societies, that really built on equity, on sustainability, that has respect for nature, etc., then can we build those organizations that feel autonomous? And behind that also, can we have leaders and individuals that, and I translate it a bit in my own words right now, that really have the guts and the confidence to take the action that is needed.
Fantastic. Well, I'm such a fan of Resource Alliance, and I'm such a fan of your leadership, having come in and done what you've done. So with all of that, thank you. So our second question today, which I'm bringing to the table and sharing, is what are your leadership and management styles, your personal leadership and management styles, and why?
My leadership style, maybe within the team, but also within the community that we work with so closely, is very much participatory led. And then, of course, your next question is, and why? And why is because I think we all strongly believe in that ownership and responsibility, in understanding what is your role towards kind of achieving that bigger purpose. And that could be within your organization, that could be outside of your organization. So what is really crucial for me and my team is that everyone really understands this is how I add value towards purpose, not towards a tiny island or a detail in the work that an organization does, but no, really towards that end purpose. And therefore, it doesn't matter who you are in the team, your added value is crucial.
That's terrific. And so you're back to that word collective again, right? And also collaborative, all these good C words today. I would love to hear too, when you think about leadership, there's a reason my question uses both the words leadership and management, right? Because leadership tends to be this thought of kind of this larger vision, right? This visionary approach, and how do you lead? Management, at least, from my standpoint, by the way, push back, would love to hear if you have different thoughts on this. Management to me tends to be more about kind of the day-to-day, the maybe more intimate, one-on-one with certain staff, et cetera. Would love to hear how you distinguish that, and if you change things up at all when you're thinking about, for example, I've had the great privilege of being at IFC at the International Fundraising Congress with Willeke a few times now, and she's terrific out on the main stage, and yet that calls for something perhaps a little different than when you're talking one-on-one with someone.
Oh, that is definitely true. I mean, I am much more a person into a one-to-one approach than it's kind of talking towards an audience, actually. And of course, you get feedback, you get energy back, but an interaction for me is in many ways more exciting than me being a sender. I get slightly confused about it.
I'm just going to interject. Sorry, I just have to interject here and keep it real. Willeke does not love going on main stage, and it is one of the things I probably love most about her. She is not about, getting up and getting all the applause and such. That is just not how she rolls. So I give you credit because it's very important you do that, and I hope people, constantly remind you how important that is. Yet I know it's not your comfort zone. So good for you for pushing through.
Well, And maybe I will add something there about it. It's not my comfort zone, because I will tell you something that I personally struggle with, and that's about the concept of power. It puts me in a position of power, and it raises the question to me, who am I to say to others what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done? So when I'm in that role, and when I'm in that position or situation, I'm very clear around who I represent, and where kind of that's what I share, where it came from. And often that is really built on all the experiences within the global community. And I have to also say there, I think that's how a lot of things have really gone wrong in the world. Okay, there might be forces out there, big egos that shout very loud, and they really think they can change the world. But in the end, our voice is many, many more. And the people power element of it is so crucial. And that really comes back, therefore, of do we have the guts? Do we dare to overcome those hurdles that are stopping us? And yes, for me, that sometimes means going on a stage and, I've got 800 people staring at me on their sheets, and I know there are 4,500 people online staring at me, and it's like, okay, this is not really my comfort zone, but this community has to share something. And this community, if we really create a collective, is a very big force, and we can make change.
The power of the people, right? We are at a place in the world where if organizations that are working for the greater good are not finding ways to collaborate, finding ways, and I'll give an interesting example. I don't know if you've had a chance to see or read any excerpts from Tammy Zonker's book, Calling All Heroes. One of the things I love about that book is this idea of there are a couple examples in there about how when, for example, you might have a donor who says, I want to give to X, and yet your organization doesn't do X, they do Y. The whole idea of collaborating with other organizations to say to that donor, that is wonderful. And in many ways, that's mission adjacent to what we do. But really, the organization that we work with closely on that issue is over here. And I think that the whole triangulation of that, right? The idea that the donor knows they can trust you, it builds deeper trust in your organization because they see that you're actually looking out for their best interests. Obviously, the connection and the collaboration that your organization builds with the other organization. I just think it's a win-win-win for everyone. So I love that whole idea about really rethinking, reimagining. I did want to make sure, is there anything else you want to say about your leadership or management style? And then also, what do you think about this question, asking, I feel like this is a great question for any audience, but I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on the question and especially your personal perspective.
There is one other thing that is very relevant for us as an organization like Resource Alliance, and that is at IFC in October last year, Loretta Ross was the keynote speaker, and she started mentioning about calling in as the alternative to calling out. And it's something that we really do a lot within Resource Alliance already, that we really build on best successes. We can say what is all going wrong. But that is not where we want to end, Yes, things are not always going right, what can we do to make it better? And building on those best practices, I think, from the community is a beautiful aspect that we can do. But it is also a continuous reminder towards ourselves. If we are saying no to somebody, why are we really saying no? Are we saying no because we think they are not part of our community and therefore only circling within kind of the group that has been converted already? Or are we really reaching out? Are we building bridges? Are we creating those new linkages? By calling people in and kind of widen kind of that people power, that collective, that movement that really cares for each other and cares for nature. And I think that is there, in each of us in the end. But the question is, how do we do that? And it's very easy, especially seeing what is all happening in the media at the moment, to pinpoint fingers and to be against things. But how can we personally turn that around? For me, it's really about, in a polarized world, do we want to polarize or do we want to build bridges? And that, again, is what is the world we want to see, and do we play an active role there? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It ties the question 1 and question 2 right back. And hearing folks' answers on that is, again, just absolutely core to the idea of having active listening play that critical role in how we interact with each other. So this third and last question comes from our friend Bernard Ross. And it's really for folks in all roles across all sectors. And what Bernard asked is, what are 2 to 3 ways the social impact sector can help to build a more equitable society. I think it's interesting because it also integrates with some of what we've already been talking about. I think, though, the differentiator here with this question is he's saying both this is a great question to, again, ask many people, if not all people. Yet I think he's also saying, what do you, Willeke, think? What would you say are 2 to 3 ways our sector can help to build a more equitable society? What are some examples you would give?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, thanks very much, Bernard Ross, for this great question, because I think it's so aligned with how we started the conversation and about the dialogues that, for example, we had as Resource Alliance with the board around the strategic thinking and how does the world look like as well. So yeah, I think in a very clear nutshell, of course, I would say civil society and that rebalancing of civil society, state and market is really crucial. But I think it's also really looking back at and reminding ourselves what is the role of civil society. And there are a couple of things I think that are really crucial there. One is, for example, the role of civil society is to be a watchdog. There might be new policies, but are they really implemented in the right way? Or when there are some gaps, for example, can we find new ways and mechanisms, that really can shrink that gap? I had the fortune to live and work for a couple of years in India, where an organization like Pratham really played that watchdog role for education. So there was a new education policy introduced that there should be a school at maximum 5 kilometers away from any kind of child in India, which is quite an undertaking and quite an interesting policy to introduce. But then the question was, are they really there? And if the schools were not there, could they be built? And then the next question was, did they get kind of the educational quality that was really required? So there were tests done that some of them were still on the second grade of reading. And then Pratham introduced kind of innovative mechanisms and courses that would get them up to the right level again. And that, for me, is really, government and civil society working together, even while, there could be a critical watchdog role there as well. Of course, I think other roles that are really important are about representing marginalized groups. And I know that's something that is on the thread at the moment, but it shouldn't. That representation is really crucial. We spoke already about people power. Of course, that is an element of civil society as well. But I think also around, can we create norms that shape the market, that shape the state? Let's think about ethical AI, that shape technology and new kind of forces that are coming our way. I think as civil society, we have a crucial role to play there. And I think in this turbulent world where a lot is thrown at us, I think civil society has a beautiful opportunity to create an alternative narrative. A narrative that is based on caring for each other, a narrative that is based on caring for humanity, and a narrative that is based on caring for the planet. And what we really hear and see across a global community of over 30,000 fundraisers, campaigners, change makers that we are in conversation with, that's really what humanity wants. Instead of destroying and polarization and division and hate and anger. So coming back to where we started from, and I know I mentioned to you already, you are a stubborn optimist. I really feel, Martha, we do not have another choice than to be an unbelievable stubborn optimist and say, yes, we see the leaders out there. We see the communities out there. We know what people do, and people do care for each other. And that is what we need to get out there in the media, in the messages.
Well, Willeke, my goodness, this has been such a joy and pleasure for me. I just could not appreciate more your perspective, your being so present here today. I would like listeners to check out Willeke's organization, Resource Alliance, which is at resource-alliance.org. There are so many online resources and educational offerings, and I have to do a shout out about the annual conference, which I just think is phenomenal, and that is IFC, the International Fundraising Congress, taking place in October. Willeke, any final thoughts in general, beyond our questions?
Well, I'm really, it makes me laugh that you are mentioning about IFC because we just announced, and it is, I think, summarizing our conversation in one word, and the theme will be unstoppable. So, Martha, we will absolutely be unstoppable. And we are not going to react anymore, but we're going to proactively show that there is another world out there. And we're going to make that a reality. So thanks very much for having me.
My goodness, chills. Seriously, chills. Willeke, take care. Thank you so much again for being on. Glad you asked.
Thanks for having me.
What a great discussion. Willeke is always so compelling. I have myriad takeaways from our conversation, and I'll share a few with you now. This quote from Willeke really stood out to me. Disrupting is quite easy, but creating the new is not always easy. Willeke's question, what is the world that we want to see, is rooted in solutions, and these solutions simply aren't as easy as pointing out problems. Go figure, right? To scale this question down to our day-to-day lives, we can simply replace the word world with anything we're engaged in. For example, instead of pointing out what's wrong with our neighborhood, the potholes, the lack of civil engagement, perhaps the poor condition of the parks, we can ask ourselves, what is the neighborhood we want to see? And then the follow-up question, which is key, so how do we make that happen? Comes naturally after this, encouraging imagination, motivation, and solutions. This can be applied in our households, our school, to our job, etc. Keeping hope alive through the stories of people helping each other, even during the most challenging times, like right now, is the world I want to see. One example is how the people of Minneapolis keep showing up for each other, even in the face of murder, kidnappings, and general illegal mayhem. They are a model and example for the rest of the world, and they really do give me hope for the future. I also loved Willeke's response to my question, what are your personal leadership and management styles and why? There are so many leadership styles as we've discussed on this show. I find myself learning more and more about the different styles out there, and I'm very curious to explore something new in my own life. It's easy to find something that works and stick with it. We've all heard the quote, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I just learned recently that this saying was coined by T. Burt Lance, the director of the Office of Management and Budget under, wait for it, President Jimmy Carter in 1977. Folks, that's almost 50 years ago. Get this, Lance actually faced intense criticism and investigations regarding his banking practices, which ultimately led to his resignation. Is this really who we want to take advice from? That's all to say, just because something isn't broken doesn't mean we can't look for ways to improve it. Perhaps there's some aspects of these different leadership and management styles that could really work. It's important to not take chances on behalf of other folks, so a good place to start practicing new leadership techniques is within trusted relationships with small risk factors, such as the household and close friend circles. I did want to share in this segment around management and leadership that my 5 priorities as a leader have always been authenticity, accessibility, empathy, transparency, and vulnerability. So I happened to be the AFP Global Chair when the pandemic arrived on our U.S. shores. In that moment, I felt it was my job to show a healthy mix of steadiness, empathy, and also real concern about what was happening in the world. What I mean is not acting like everything was just fine, yet still trying my best to be a calming, there's that word again, calm, influence, including shooting a homegrown video that I recorded on my phone that was sent out to the entire AFP Global membership. While the video included some tips on how to interact with colleagues, with donors, etc., during that difficult time. At the end of the day, my primary goal was actually to ensure our members felt seen and heard, and so that they'd know we truly cared about their well-being. Interestingly, I still get folks to this day, that's right, more than 6 years later, who tell me how much that video meant to them and how much being a part of the AFP community helped get them through that extremely trying time. Now, from a management standpoint, right, I'm differentiating here between leadership and management. Those are two different things. There are intersections there, but they're different. So from that management standpoint, I believe in putting staff first. That means in front of donors, in front of board members, in front of everyone, even your mission beneficiaries. Why? Why would I say that? Well, because staff are the ones that make everything, including services to community beneficiaries, possible. They are who make mission delivery real every single day. For example, when I was at Defenders of Wildlife, I considered advocating for staff with our CEO my number one job on everything from salary compensation to professional development budgeting to workplace policies, etc. Then Willike's ideas around our third question, they're so pertinent, they're so relevant. Bernard Ross asked, what are 2 to 3 ways the social impact sector can help to build a more equitable society? One of Willike's solutions is centered around the idea of a watchdog, something that we're clearly lacking on a federal government level right now in this country anyway. We're seeing in real time how equity dissolves without this crucial aspect. We can also apply this watchdog mentality to our personal lives. Technology can help out as an assistant. For example, time management is crucial to not only productivity, but also to our happiness. Setting time limits on social media usage, creating alerts to build routines for exercise or hydration, and finding the right app to help with workflow can greatly improve our lives. This is an excellent example of how Willike's solutions to building a more equitable society can also help in everyday life. I love the idea, by the way, of the stubborn optimist. And Willeke was honestly calling me that, right? So I'm honored that she would refer to me as such. I agree that we don't have any other choice than to be stubborn optimists and lift up the leaders fighting for positive change, acknowledge the communities coming together to stand strong, and recognize that people really do care for each other. I'm proud to use this podcast to amplify these voices and get these important messages out there. All right, so as we do on every episode, we are at your action item for this week. I'd like you to explore my question about leadership and management styles. What's your style and why? Reminder, if you don't manage another staffer, that doesn't mean you aren't a leader. Think about what you do daily, weekly, monthly to lead, and how you manage relationships with your colleagues, with your boss, with your donors, etc. And don't forget, being self-aware by identifying your own style is the chocolate or the caramel or the marshmallow topping on your personal sundae. Then digging into why that's your style gets you all the way to the bottom of your ice cream dish and reveals what makes your own personal flavor stand out. Okay, now I'm craving dessert. See you next time on Glad You Asked. Thanks for listening to Glad You Asked, a Hazen Institute for Leadership training podcast. If you enjoy the show, come find me on Patreon for more in-depth content. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. This show is produced by the amazing Patrick and Benjamin Childers of Odd Conduit Media. Please check the show notes for our guest links, today's questions, and more information. A massive heartfelt shout out to my father, Hazen Schumacher, who taught me the power of audio storytelling through his weekly radio show, Jazz Revisited, and to Basil and the Supernaturals, featuring Kevin Thompson and Herbie Hunkley for making original music. If you have a question you'd like me to put out there on our show, send me a message on LinkedIn or send me an email at hello@hazeninc.com. Have you used a question from our show in your life? If so, drop us a line and tell us how it went. You can also learn more about my work at hazeninc.com. Tune in next time to keep exploring active listening on another episode of Glad You Asked.